Welcome to the Q&NE expansion update number 5. Welcome back, or welcome if you're a new viewer. In this video, we will be walking through the final steps to complete the hidden staging yard, the Helix, and the lead to the portal. If layout construction isn't really your thing, I've included a new section at the end of the video dealing with how I came up with the new industry that you're going to see on the layout. And we'll walk through some of the track planning exercises I did before arriving at my final plan. As a quick refresher, this is where we were at the end of our last video, having completed the first turn of the Helix. And this is where we are now. It may not look like that much of a difference, but it's not just completing the Helix, it's including the yard ladder and the new benchwork to carry the lead all the way to the tunnel portal. I decided on putting spacers between the two Helix levels at the 1/8 points around the circle, plus an additional support between each of those on the outside only due to the wider radius. To avoid splitting these spacers while screwing them in, I opted to pre-drill the holes from underneath up into them. Wouldn't you know it, I broke my drill bit. Luckily, I remembered that the KD drill and tap kit comes with a drill bit exactly the same size, so until I could get out and buy a new one, I used that one. Before finalizing the location of the next level of sub-road bed, and screwing it in place, I wanted to make sure that it was exactly where it's supposed to be. And that meant making sure that the two levels of the Helix were plumb with one another so that when I came around later with the fascia, it would be straight. With the Helix sub-road bed now firmly in place, I once again had a nice flat workbench to cut up some more cork road bed. And so I took the opportunity to do that now because once the track is in place, I really wouldn't have such a nice workbench. So here you see the result of that effort. More than enough strips of cork ready to go for the balance of the hidden layout. The next piece of the sub-road bed was the area supporting the ladder arrangement for the hidden staging yard, which will connect to the next level up loop that runs to the tunnel portal. You may recall from earlier episodes of this series, we had cut out these sections of plywood and put them aside till now, but now's the time to connect them all up and put them in place above the lower level turning loop. This left us with a gap that had to be filled between the yard ladder and the loop, and we'll show you how we filled that gap in just a minute. For all of these splice connections, I used the sandwich method, and I got a hold of some 1 1/4 inch screws because 2 times 5/8 is 1 1/4, and that makes sure that you don't have any pointy screws sticking out from any of these connections. In order to support the plywood sub-road bed for this section of the layout, I created some very simple support structures. Here you see the first one located next to where the portal is going to be. This one required the most fiddling with to make sure the elevation was correct, and it had 2 constraints. One, that the extension of this point had to clear the Helix below it, which is another 4 inches or so higher, and it also had to clear the visible part of the layout that's going to sit above it, so this tunnel portal has to be tall enough. Here you can see me checking the existing layout where I have a similar location where the tunnel portal goes underneath the town above, and the clearance from top of rail is about 3 1/8 inches. Moving around the loop, here you see me test fitting some support structure and then finally securing it in place slightly differently, but solid. And the only problem here was that the sub roadbed didn't fit where it's supposed to fit because the splice part that I used was too large. This resulted in the new section of sub roadbed being slightly skewed from the loop roadbed below, which would affect the fascia. You can see that in the level here, and so it required some trimming of the splice section to allow the overall curved section of sub roadbed to slide closer to the wall. And here you see the final check to make sure that indeed the two sections of sub roadbed align nicely. And here's a look at the third primary support structure coming around the corner just across from where we're going to connect up with the yard ladder. Here's a look at the finished sub roadbed in place. All that's missing is the gap between the loop at this level and the yard ladder for the staging yard, and we'll get to that next. We also need to fill in some of the spaces between the primary support sections, and you'll see that too. To fill in the gap, the first thing I did was trace the gap with a piece of paper, rubbing my finger along the edges of the plywood, and then cutting that paper so it can be used as a template on a piece of plywood. And here you see the section traced out on the plywood and cut and fit in place. So here's a look at what I originally designed and hoped for the yard ladder in the hidden staging yard. This is the only place that I'm using number 8s. I wanted a smooth entrance into the staging because it's largely non-visible. It may seem odd, but I chose to stick with the same turnouts that I used on the rest of the layout for all my mainline crossovers and all my hidden staging tracks. In the past 30 years or so, I've never had an electrical problem with these turnouts, nor have I had derailments. And that's partly because the movable points are actually cross-sections of rail that have been shaved down in the factory process, and the design of the hinges maintain electrical conductivity. While these turnouts have a very long and isolated frog, Atlas does provide a connecting loop that you can use to power the frogs if necessary. One of my biggest concerns and impediments to having a smooth yard ladder was the location of these joints in the plywood and whether or not they would affect the placement and operation of the tortoise switch machines that I plan to use. Well, I think it could have worked with the longer throw rods. I decided I really want to avoid that, and so I tried to place the turnouts as much as possible away from the splice joints. Unfortunately, that pushed them too far apart, resulting in a switch machine being located directly above another track on the bottom end and a tight curvature at the top end. Though in the end I settled on placing 3 of the turnouts end to end and the 4th one further up, a little further away, and this allowed for reasonably gentle reverse curves into the yard. And this way all of the switch machines will be directly accessible from underneath the layout. After using my usual methods for laying out and fixing down the cork roadbed and sighting down the turnout ladder, I was horrified to find that it wasn't quite straight. So I thought, how am I going to get this to be the way I want it, which is straight, of course. And I came upon the following idea. Using kite string pulled taut and wrapped around nails placed at the center line of the track at both far ends of the ladder, I effectively created a proper center line. And having done that, I could then lay the turnouts where they belong, centered on that string line. It wasn't quite the same as the center line between the two halves of the cork strips, but that's what I was seeing when I was looking down doing my sight line. It didn't look right. So this gave me a perfectly straight line. Once that was done, using a fine tip black marker, I marked off both sides of the ties adjacent to the throw rod, and this basically marked the area that I needed to drill through for the throw rod for the switch machine underneath. With the track alignment and cork roadbed nailed down, so to speak, I've set about to fill in the missing pieces of benchwork support or sub roadbed supports to firm it up, basically. This allowed me to use up some of those offcuts of 1x4s. No one would ever notice or see these edges tucked in against the wall. So here's a look around the loop where I have filled in where necessary with 1x2s or 1x2 bridges so that the plywood sub roadbed really doesn't give anywhere. It's fairly solid now. At the end of our last video, we just about finished off the flex track from the second box that we had opened, 25 strips. So here we see the third box opened, and this should carry us right through to the portal and the end of the hidden track area. These number 8 turnouts are quite long, and they don't have extra holes in the ties to nail down the mid portion of the turnout. So I add some nails to act as spikes against the guardrails to hold it firm down on the cork. The 4 inside tracks of the Helix staging yard are electrically isolated, or need to be electrically isolated, because they form part of the return loop. So I shaved the ends of the flex track to allow for an 020 piece of styrene to slip in between. I will come back later and glue in some permanent blockers, but here's what those gaps look like. Notice that I've also added some additional track nails to act as spikes to hold it firmly in place. And here are a couple of views of the finished staging yard ladder from both ends. It's not exactly what I had designed, but overall I'm pleased with the results. And here's a quick flyover of the completed hidden trackage for the layout. That includes the return loops on the bottom, the Helix staging yard, yard ladder, and the connecting track at the mid-level, because there is another level on top of this. And at the end here, you can see I've left a short piece of unfinished cork and track because I have to wait until I've built the benchwork of the next level on top to make sure I've got it aligned properly for where that track is eventually going to go. And finally, as a little teaser for our next video, before we get into track planning and the story of what's on the very top level, here's a look at some alternative ways of doing the wiring for the Helix. Method number 1 is to run the wires on top of the plywood, and crossing the tracks at each of the joints, and then running back to the terminal strip that would be below the lower level of the Helix, where all the wires from those tracks would be connected. Method number 2 would be to cut across the cork roadbed by taking slivers out of it and sliding the wires in between the ties to get a more direct route to the terminal strip. In the end, I think it's going to be a combination of the two, whatever makes sense, where the gaps in the track are already very close together. That makes more sense to run the wires there. But where the joint between the tracks or where the soldering points are far away, perhaps some different method will be devised to get down to the lower level to connect to the terminal points. The concern here is not wanting to have wires dangling down between the two levels, potentially getting hung up by trains passing underneath. It does appear that there's a fair amount of space, between the high cube box cars and the underside of the sub-road bed above. But the piece of paper adjacent to the box car is actually a template for a double stack container well car, which leaves somewhere between 1/4 of an inch and 3/8 of an inch clearance. And I didn't want to play with wires hanging in that shallow of a space. This layout expansion has been a long time coming. What you see here is a sketch that I had made back in 2014, so 10 years ago, in fact, when I had the first idea that I would take back this portion of the basement and extend through the wall roughly where I think I'm going to do it now, and a main line would come around, fill the space, and then enter a portal here and duck underneath and go into some form of hidden staging. A switch off the main line somewhere here would rise to an upper level where some form of town or major industry would be located. So any trains coming from the rest of the layout would need necessarily, of course, a runaround track, arrival or departure track, and then a tail track for locomotives to run around and take the train back home. I had envisaged early on that this would be a one industry town, or just basically one large industry, one customer to be served with many different tracks. And so the first idea I had was some form of cement facility, and I'll show you in the next sketch what that first idea looked like. I went through several iterations of the cement plant idea before I was satisfied with this version that you see here. But in essence, there'd be an offline connection where from a gravel pit or excavation where crushed limestone will be brought in through conveyor belt and stored in silos here. This would conveniently hide this track that's coming out from behind this long backdrop that would run here, separating the track that's coming through the wall from the rest of the layout. And as well, you see this is the first time I'm showing the tunnel portal where the track goes down and heads down to what you now know as the hidden staging or Helix staging yard and return loop. The cement facility itself, the loadout would be at this end where there'd be room for at least 5 or 6 short 2-bay cement hoppers on each track. So a fair sized train could be generated here. Another track running off into a building here for other kinds of supplies. A major loadout facility for boxcars for bagged cement here. Other chemicals coming in and covered hoppers on this track here. And down here, this would be coal coming in for the to generate power for the kiln. So this would be the kilns here, the rotating kilns, and you see the overhead conveyors that would be running to various points along the facility. I did like this very much for a long time, but I did eventually become concerned that it was like a one-trick pony. It was mostly 2-bay cement hopper cars, some box cars, some other kinds of covered hoppers, and coal cars. And I think I was looking for more variety than that. And I came up with another idea, which was to build a paper mill. I'd seen so many articles and layouts, what other people had done, and it really started to intrigue me just based on the variety of traffic that could come and go. So I'll show you that one next. This is the first sketch I had done of a paper mill. It's not terribly detailed. You can see there's a power plant here and the beginnings of I'm not sure if this is the pulp mill, but there were certainly tank cars coming in here and going out. The second track is for load out of recovery chemicals, and there may have been this track here may have been for lime, I think, and then a track inside the building here for loading out finished paper. I think this track here was a clean out track. Somewhere in here I think I had recycled paper coming in, and so those box cars would have to be cleaned out before they were loaded with fresh paper. And then another track here for kaolin, either in tank cars or covered hoppers. So the whole point here, you know, compared to the cement plant idea, was that there was a great variety of car types and products coming and going in both directions, and I really liked that idea. I didn't develop much further than you see here, because I realized quickly that these two tracks, although there's a slight grade coming up here to clear the track going underneath in the tunnel, these two tail tracks do not clear the track coming through the wall, the main line, and so I didn't develop this any further. The next version of this idea got rid of the conflict here with the main track coming through the wall, started adding more detail. You see the piles of wood chips here in the corner with conveyor belts coming across to a large pulp mill, or kraft mill I should say, and power plant here as well, recovery boiler, the tank loadout. And so you see we've separated the outbound tank cars here versus the inbound tank cars here. Separate building here for lime coming in, and I don't recall what this may have been for chlorine over here. Still have the clean out track here, track inside the building, and again kaolin in tanks or covered hoppers here. And the tail track here is still curving, but not quite as long as I would have liked, but certainly enough room for the locomotives to uncouple from their train, pull ahead, and then run through a clear alley to get down to the other end of the yard. I still kept the idea of tracks going through the backdrop between buildings. I did like that. There's two tracks here, and I think one was for just to have a switchback, pullback for the cars that need to be switched here, and the other track was perhaps for additional cars being loaded just out of sight. Here we see a further refinement of this concept. The acid track here is confined now and fenced in, separate from everything else. We still have tank car spots here for the kraft mill, outbound loads still here. Two ways to get in there. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to have a switch here or to have this track service directly off the yard track. Here we have clear inbound. I think you see there's three doors here. So this would have been the recycled paper coming in offloaded, and I switched or added the possibility of this track going inside the building now. So this could have still had the clean out. You see I got a fainter line here for, you know, the track could have been on this side of the building or on this side of the building, and another one here. So I started thinking at this point of having two production lines. So maybe there's an older part of the building of the plant complex, and then a newer second production line built here. So it could be really busy now. You can imagine loading out 4 or 5 cars in each of these buildings. All of a sudden we have a very, very busy plant. We still have the tracks sneaking away between the buildings, but this is purely the pulled back switching lead for all these tracks here that are reached through a reverse move. Just a footnote to this one. The curved tracks here and the buildings on either side, again, I like the idea of these concrete canyons. I was hoping that, you know, by curving these tracks away in between the buildings, you'd lose sight of them because this building would be, you know, blocking your view. But it certainly gave room for the locomotives, like I said, to come in and sneak out. But on either side of this middle track, which would be the main track, there could be a track for the liquid kaolin tank cars, and a separate track here for the covered hoppers coming in. You see a covered unloading area. I've seen a number of photos where these, certainly the tank cars, can be offloaded on curved tracks with hoses next to the building. So that's something I added to this one. At this point, I had a bit of a brainwave, I guess you'd say, that this level here, you know, the mainline track was coming down, but this, after this switch, this track was coming back up. That at this point in the paper mill, the track level was the same as the track level on the other side of the wall. And so my concern about not having enough headroom suddenly evaporated, because I realized I can run the tracks through the wall and they'd be hidden inside the refrigerated warehouse on the other side of the wall on the completed layout. So that was a huge bonus. So now the main line was quite long, and you know, locomotives easily pull back, but also the tracks going into the buildings could be much, much longer. The pullback could be much, much longer. And so suddenly I had all kinds of capacity for a major, major facility. This is big time railroading with large trains, and this support yard would easily be overloaded. It also allowed me to get rid of the curved section from the previous version and have straight sections through here, with some of the unloading tracks covered and only the main line sneaking through between them. Again, the concrete canyon idea, making it easy to camouflage the fact that that track is going through the wall. All the other tracks, you wouldn't know it because there's buildings surrounding it. So this, I really like this idea. It gave me great flexibility. It gave me the possibility of having the track going into this building here, either on this side or on this side. I don't think I changed the rest of this here. No, this pretty much is the same from before. This tail track here, I think the idea here was that this plant has now become big enough that it could have its own plant switcher, and that would be a little diesel service facility at the tail end there. So big change on this version of the layout here. From this point forward, each new version of the track plan that I developed was pretty much just a refinement of the previous one. So you won't see as much change, but this is just fun for me. I just like the idea of messing with the design, at least until I actually start laying track. This costs nothing to do, and you never know when you're going to come up with a great idea. So what you see here is, I think this one is different from before. This shows the acid track here, separate and fenced in. Still have the line coming in, covered hoppers, tank cars inbound here, tank cars outbound here. Interestingly here, this is an idea I got from one of the photos I found. There were buildings with loading docks in the middle of an asphalt area where the track's actually going through, again disappearing into the concrete canyons, so that I could have had an operation here where when these tracks have boxcars spotted with recycled paper coming in, it blocks the use of the pullback track to switch these other spots. So the timing of this operation becomes critical now. They have to, it's like a dance. They have to switch these first and then spot these cars overnight and then reverse it in the morning. What you see here, this line here, it's trying to demonstrate the passage of time, where there might have been originally a track going inside this building. When they converted to taking inbound recycled paper, this track was new openings in the wall were created for this track. I think this was originally where the acid was, but it was moved here safely out of the way to allow for this to happen. And again, we have the tracks going through the building here. Here I changed it to show two shorter tracks for the liquid kaolin, and here the dry kaolin on this track, again with the main line going through the middle, and again still with the track here that could be a second production line for the mill. This version is a minor refinement, but it concentrated on this area along the wall where you see I've added in yellow hatching that there would be connections between the buildings across the tracks. I like that idea as well. Again, helping to hide the fact that this middle track goes through the wall, and perhaps having some weather protection for the liquid kaolin tracks here. So that's I think the only change on this version here. In this version, the primary change is around here, where I was trying to figure out a way to include the lime kiln, which supports the covered hoppers coming in as part of the overall caustic recovery process that generates the outbound tank loads here. So I just did some adjustment of the building outlines, not changing the track really. What I did here though was I moved the acid track back here. I'm still showing a track buried in the asphalt to show that history or passage of time, but I moved the acid track from here because I needed the space for the kiln to here. And down here where the liquid kaolin is, I kept going back and forth between having open space versus tight canyons. So this version, I just played with a gently curving track and some tanks for the liquid kaolin. I think everything else stayed the same. Last one I'll show you. Yay, you're getting tired of these, aren't you? The last one I'll show you here, again, minor refinement, putting back the concrete canyons idea for the liquid kaolin. I keep going back and forth on this one. I don't know where I'll land finally, and just adding a few extra tanks to fill out space. So as you can see, this is a constantly evolving concept, and until I actually get the next level of plywood down, where I'll actually put the turnouts and track in place to get a feel for it, it'll continuously evolve. This one was done back in May. I think I have 4 other versions since then that are buried on my laptop where I've got my AutoCAD. Again, not much change, but certainly it's an evolutionary process. And as we get closer to the build of this layout, the top level of the layout, I'll certainly drag out some more sketches to share with you. But I wanted to show you the thought process that I've been going through for, you can say 10 years, but more recently 6 months or so as I've been developing this concept. Anyway, love to have your thoughts and comments on this. Nothing is cast in stone as yet, but you can see the direction I'm going. Thanks for watching. As always, thank you for watching. If you enjoy layout improvement videos, here are a few others that you may find interesting. If you're not already a subscriber, you can click on the logo on the top right-hand corner of your screen.